how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Miss Megan?
I'm good. And yes, I'm Miss Megan. And what is your name?
My name is Sarah. I'm part of the youth group.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have a conversation today. What verses are we talking about?
We're talking about Genesis 17, 1 through 7, and verses 16 through 17.
15 and 16, right?
15 and 16.
Yeah. It gets a little weirder if you just read 16 and 17.
It does a little bit.
So you're going to read that for us, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it starts with the sign of the covenant. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between you and me, and will make you extremely numerous. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be an ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after their generations, and for everlasting covenant to be God to you, to your offsprings after you. And 15 and 16 says, God said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall now call her not call her Sarai, but call her name should be Sarah. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations, kings of people, and shall come from her.
Yep.
That is
So,
it.
yeah. Was this a familiar text for you?
It is a familiar text because we recently studied this at school.
Okay.
Which was definitely going to help.
Yeah, you've got the inside track on it. So it was pretty familiar. And what in this reading of it, what stood out for you?
I feel what stood out to me was when God changed both of their names, because that's just signifying like a new change, or like, yeah, just basically just a new change, and they're no longer themselves, they are new people now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it wasn't just for Abraham, it was for Sarah too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it was for both of them. And did anything in here bring up any questions for you?
So far, just not really, because I've already studied this verse, but one question was that Abraham is 99 years old, and he's now would be very, very old. And so is Sarah. And so I think they're having a very big struggle saying, why are we having a child when we're already so old?
Yeah, it's something that they really wanted, because without children at that time, you just didn't have any other legacy. You didn't have your property, your animals. They would go to a relative, but they wouldn't go to your children. And so your name, your children, your legacy, like it was a big deal, and they didn't have any, but it seemed like that wasn't possible at this time in their lives. Yeah. Can you imagine being in your 90s and becoming a new mother?
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
Now I can barely handle my cat.
Yeah, I don't think that sounds appealing to me either. So yeah, well, they were definitely older parents. Yeah, they were older parents. Anything else that you had questions about or stood out for you?
God said that not only will He bless Sarah with a child, but she will. Their legacy will generally lead to kings and of nations, and just greatness. And I feel that not only are they having a child at such a very later point in life, but they're also having like a great child that will eventually bring them glory.
Yeah, that the promise of legacy isn't just for the next generation, it's to go on and on.
Yeah.
And for me, I notice the amount of times that God brings up covenant, doesn't just say it once to Abram at the time, but I continues over and over to remind Abram that this covenant is between being made between them. And then that later promise to Sarah that she's included in the covenant. It's not just between God and Abraham, it's between God and Abraham and Sarah. And so they're in it together. And it's not, and so yeah, they're not separate. They both get new names, new life change. Um, and how do you think, so it's Lent now.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think we're reading this text during Lent?
I feel that the signifying of them have adorning new names is kind of relevant to Lent because it's kind of like we're renewing ourselves as well.
Hmm.
And that's just like the major connection that I've come up with. I know there's a couple others, but
Yeah, that was for me too. I was definitely that new name, the renewal of their lives. And yeah, like you said, they've lived long lives already. And but this is a whole new phase of their life. Being
oh yeah,
parents always changes your life
completely
radically.
starting over.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they're going to have a whole new existence. And that is exactly what we're doing during Lent, is reflecting on our own lives and how we might be renewed. And especially with Easter, the big renewal, right? This
Oh yeah.
huge change in our lives. What other
It,
connections did you see? You said you saw some others in there.
um. Also, it isn't expressed as immediate text, but there has to have there has to be a lot of trust between God, Abraham, and Sarah for this to follow through. And last week in leadership at my school, we talked about this verse, and it said that Sarah did not immediately become pregnant. She like waited a long time for her to finally become pregnant and then give birth.
Hmm.
But I know they were doubting God in that time, especially Sarah. Like it tells you later on, but yeah, there has to have been a lot of trust there. I know there was a lot of doubt, but just trust the process and trust God, and that will eventually get you to where He says.
And it's difficult. Yeah, so you mentioned this. It's challenging to maintain that trust. And Abraham and Sarah don't completely fulfill their end of the bargain, right? Like they don't. Yeah, and yeah, so she's like, "Okay, we're not having a kid. We're not having a kid. Here's my servant. Have a kid with my servant."
Oh yeah,
And and God's like, "No, that's not, I mean, I will bless them also." Like God then makes a different covenant with Hagar and Ishmael, but that's like God's like, "No, no, no. Like trust the process, like you're saying."
wait a minute. I know you're impatient, but wait a
Mhm.
minute. It will be there.
Do you find, I know when I was a teenager, it was hard to see what was coming up next and to know what's in our future, to see
Oh
the
yeah.
bigger picture, and to get out of the kind of daily stuff too, the little sniping at each other, and to like, oh, so and so was mean to me, and then later on in life realizing that wasn't that big of a deal, but it seemed like a huge deal at the time.
Yeah. And there's like so many things that I just have to trust the process with. Like with school and sports and like every other thing I have to do. Like I constantly find myself saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is especially with homework because I'm the biggest procrastinator. But I'm just like, I just have to get it done, get it turned in. I know in the long run it will be great.
Hmm.
Like I will graduate, hopefully go to a good school, just trust the process, just get through it.
Right. That's, I love that. I love that it requires a lot of trust, to do what we're supposed to do and to follow God. And I think so this brings us back to that covenant piece, that um the covenant doesn't get broken when Abraham and Sarah don't fulfill their end. Right? Like, so
Yeah, it does not get broken. It still happens.
yeah, God still fulfills God's promises even when we don't. And so that is so powerful because this isn't just a covenant for Abraham and Sarah. Like you were saying, they're going to have generations, multitudes of family following them. And this covenant applies to them as well. So God is promising to be faithful to them, not just to Abraham and Sarah. That it's amazing. and and we see that over and over again that God is good. And I think as Christians, especially, this was the beginning of the Jewish people. They would not have been known as Jewish people then. They were Hebrews from the
Yeah.
name Abram and Abraham. But that we are adopted into this covenant that was not made for us directly. And so it's important that we remember that God's covenant wasn't just like for you and me, but that it was for people that we weren't a part of, but we have been adopted into the covenant as well. So, what do you think? What is a question that you want to leave people with? What do you think the main question for you out of this text is?
I feel like one question that I could leave people with is what covenant can you make with yourself? Because I know for a fact that I need to make multiple covenants with myself. One being to stop procrastinating, which I'm working on. No promises, but I'm working on it. But basically, just like what kind of trust or promise can I make to myself that I know that I will fulfill because I made it to myself, nobody else, just me.
And I think, the idea of covenant that even if you aren't perfect, if you aren't fulfilling it, that you can go back. That for these promises that God has given us, God never breaks that covenant. And so, if we can trust ourselves, if we can make those promises to ourselves that, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And if I fail, if I mess up, I'm not unworthy. Like, it doesn't mean that I can't do that. It just means that I need to try again.
Exactly. You
And
just
I
need to trust the process. Just try again.
exactly. That's the main. I think that's a great main message. Trust the process. So yeah, what promises are you going to make with yourself to yourself this Lent? Yeah. Well, thanks for having this conversation with me. It
You're
was
so
really fun.
welcome.
And look, we got a cat too.
We do. I was like looking at him. I'm like, where's my cat? She's probably downstairs eating, of course.
Rigby does not always join me for this conversation, so this is actually, a really unique experience.